Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something. How many of you have ever looked at your to-do list and thought, "I'll do it later"? How many of you have let fear, doubt, or plain old procrastination steal your productivity? Today, I want to give you something so simple, so powerful, and so effective it'll change how you work forever. It's called the 5-minute rule. Sure, here are 6 keynotes from the speech. Start with just 5 minutes to overcome resistance. Productivity is more about starting than finishing. Momentum builds after action begins. The 5-minute rule bypasses fear and procrastination. Consistent small actions lead to big results. Discipline creates success, not motivation. The idea of starting with just 5 minutes to overcome resistance is both powerful and profoundly simple. Most people think productivity is about completing large tasks, hitting massive goals, or transforming their entire schedule overnight. But real productivity, the kind that compounds over time and leads to life-changing results, often begins with something far less dramatic, the decision to start, and more specifically, the decision to start for just 5 minutes. Why 5 minutes? Because 5 minutes is manageable, it's non-threatening, it's not overwhelming. The human brain is wired to avoid pain and discomfort. So when a task seems too large, too time-consuming, or too mentally exhausting, your mind immediately throws up roadblocks. It gives you reasons to delay, to avoid, to put it off until later. But when you tell yourself, "I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes," you short-circuit that fear response. You trick your mind into taking the first step, which is always the hardest part. Most people never achieve what they're capable of because they never begin. They wait for the perfect moment, the right mood, or the ideal set of circumstances. But those things rarely, if ever, show up. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for a train that isn't coming. If you want to get anywhere, you've got to start walking, and 5 minutes is all it takes to begin that journey. The genius of the 5-minute rule is that it removes the pressure to finish. It says don't worry about the whole task, don't think about the end result, just start. And that's where momentum comes from. Momentum doesn't come from planning. It doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing. Action is the ignition switch. And 5 minutes of action is usually all it takes to go from motionless to moving. Let's take an example. Say you need to write a report. You've been dreading it for days. Every time you think about it, your brain conjures up images of hours hunched over a keyboard, struggling to find the right words. So you avoid it. You distract yourself. You clean your room, scroll through social media, make another cup of coffee. Anything but the task itself. But what happens when you say, "I'll just open the document and write for 5 minutes"? You lower the barrier to entry, and once you start, something amazing happens. You realize it's not as bad as you thought. You get into a rhythm, words start to flow, and more often than not, you keep going long after those 5 minutes are up. This principle applies to everything: exercise, phone calls, decluttering, budgeting, learning, praying, you name it. The problem is rarely the activity itself. The real problem is the mental weight we attach to it. We make tasks bigger than they are. We catastrophize. We convince ourselves it's going to be difficult, boring, or painful. But when you strip it down to just 5 minutes, you take back control. You take the mountain and reduce it to a pebble. People often underestimate what 5 focused minutes can do. 5 minutes of reading each day can turn into a book a month. 5 minutes of stretching can lead to increased flexibility and lower stress. 5 minutes of writing can lead to a published book. 5 minutes of quiet reflection can change your entire mindset. Small hinges swing big doors. And those small hinges are built one 5-minute choice at a time. There's also a powerful psychological shift that happens when you start doing rather than thinking. Action changes identity. Every time you follow through on a 5-minute task, you reinforce the belief that you're someone who takes action. You build confidence, you grow in discipline, and that 5-minute victory becomes a brick in the foundation of your character. It's not about the task, it's about who you're becoming by showing up. Now, let's be clear, this isn't about tricking yourself into productivity. It's about building trust with yourself. When you commit to 5 minutes and follow through, you're making a promise and keeping it. That kind of integrity creates momentum far beyond the moment. It builds inner strength. It builds a habit of showing up regardless of how you feel. There's something sacred about the decision to start. Even if it's just 5 minutes, that choice is an act of faith. It says, I believe progress is possible. I believe I have the power to move forward. And in that moment, you're not just getting something done. You're reclaiming authority over your time, your energy, and your purpose. Productivity is more about starting than finishing. That might sound counterintuitive in a world that praises completed goals and final outcomes, but the truth is, nothing gets finished unless it first gets started. And for most people, that first step is the real obstacle. Not the work itself, not the time it takes, but the act of beginning. Starting is the spark that sets the entire process in motion. We live in a results-driven society where value is often measured by output. Deadlines, quotas, metrics, they all focus on what's finished. But focusing only on the finish line can create unnecessary pressure. It leads to overwhelm, anxiety, and paralysis. The brain looks at a big task or a long project and thinks, I'll never get through all that. So instead of making progress, we stall, we overthink, we delay, and sometimes we give up before we even try. But what if we flip the script? What if instead of obsessing over the end result, we put our full attention on the beginning? That first sentence, that first rep, that first step, that's where real productivity lies. Because starting something sends a signal to your brain that you're moving forward. It builds momentum, and momentum is a force multiplier. It carries you through resistance. It shifts your identity from someone who plans to someone who executes. Think about how many times you've said, I'll do it later, and later never came. Or how often you felt stuck not because the task was hard, but because you were mentally frozen by the idea of doing it perfectly or completing it all at once. This is the trap of perfectionism and outcome fixation. Productivity, real productivity, doesn't demand that you finish right now. It demands that you move. When you focus on starting, you release yourself from the weight of needing to complete the entire task in one sitting. You give yourself permission to begin without the burden of perfection. This changes everything. It makes progress approachable. You don't need to figure out the whole path. You just need to take the first step. And after that, the next step becomes clearer. Starting also allows you to learn in real time. Plans and strategies are important, but they're not substitutes for action. When you start, even with limited knowledge, you gain feedback. You discover what works, what doesn't, and what adjustments need to be made. It's better to begin with 50% clarity and adjust along the way than to wait forever for 100% certainty that may never come. The beauty of starting is that it puts you in motion, and once you're in motion, you become more productive without even trying to be. You find flow, you gain clarity. You experience wins even if they're small. And those small wins compound. They create a sense of progress, and progress, no matter how incremental, is deeply motivating. You also learn to trust yourself more when you start consistently. Trust is built not by the size of your accomplishments, but by the consistency of your actions. When you prove to yourself that you are someone who starts, who takes initiative, who doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect, you grow in confidence. That confidence becomes the fuel for bigger and bolder action later. One of the reasons starting matters so much is that you can't finish what you don't begin. And every time you avoid starting, you reinforce the habit of inaction. But when you make starting your default response, even if you don't yet know how the task will end, you build a habit of momentum. You become someone who acts, not just someone who plans. So instead of asking, "How will I finish this?" start asking, "What can I do right now to begin?" That question has power. It shrinks the task to something manageable. It shifts your focus from fear to action. It puts you in control, because action is always within your reach, even if the outcome isn't. Starting might not be as glamorous as finishing. It won't earn applause. It might even feel insignificant, but it's the most important part of productivity because it's the only part you can control at any given moment. You don't need the whole plan. You don't need all the answers. You just need the courage to begin. Momentum builds after action begins. That's a fundamental truth of productivity that too many people overlook. We often wait for motivation to strike before we get started. We think we need to feel ready in order to take action. But the reality is this. It's not motivation that leads to action. It's action that generates momentum, and momentum that sustains productivity. Momentum is the force that keeps you going once you've already started. It's like pushing a car. Getting it to roll those first few inches takes the most effort. But once it's moving, even slightly, the resistance drops. Your effort becomes more effective. Things flow. The same applies to work, creativity, habits, and discipline. Once you get in motion, you stay in motion. That's physics, but it's also psychology. The challenge is getting past the starting line. That's where resistance lives. It's where doubt creeps in, where excuses feel strongest, and where distractions are most tempting. But when you push through and take the first small action, something shifts. Your mind stops anticipating the work and starts experiencing it. That shift, going from thought to execution, is the catalyst for momentum. This is why the first few minutes of any task are so critical. They determine whether you stay stuck or start building flow. When you begin, even with a tiny step, you signal to your brain that the task isn't as threatening as it seemed. You move from a passive state into an active one. That movement creates energy, and that energy builds the drive to continue. Think about any time you didn't feel like doing something: going to the gym, working on a project, making that phone call. But once you actually started, even for just a minute or two, something kicked in. You began to feel engaged, focus deepened, resistance faded. That's momentum in action. And once you're in that state, everything becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. Momentum also creates clarity. When you're stagnant, you overthink. You get caught up in mental fog, asking questions like, what if this doesn't work? Or what's the best way to start? But action cuts through confusion. As you move forward, answers reveal themselves. You stop guessing and start experiencing. That experience compounds into direction, which strengthens your momentum even more. People often believe they need long, uninterrupted periods of time to get into a productive zone. But that's not true. Even a small, intentional burst of focused effort can trigger momentum. And momentum doesn't care how small your first action was. It only cares that you acted. You could type one sentence, do one push-up, organize one item on your desk, and suddenly you're in motion. One of the most powerful aspects of momentum is how it transforms your identity in real time. When you're stuck, you feel like someone who avoids or delays. But once you take action and start moving, your self-perception begins to shift. You start to see yourself as someone who follows through, someone who gets things done. That identity shift reinforces the momentum and makes it easier to continue. Momentum also defeats procrastination. Procrastination is fueled by inertia. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to act. But momentum breaks that cycle. It says, I've already started. I'm already making progress. I'm already becoming the person who finishes things. That shift is psychological power. It gives you a new posture, a new pace, and a new level of personal authority. The truth is, momentum isn't accidental. It's built. It's built through deliberate, consistent action. It doesn't require massive effort up front, just a small spark. One intentional movement forward, one choice to ignore the voice that says not now, and respond with action instead. And the beauty is that once momentum is built, it works for you, it carries you, it removes friction. It changes your entire experience of the work. Action first, then momentum, then results. That's the formula. It doesn't start with energy. It starts with effort. You don't need to feel inspired. You don't need the perfect plan. You just need to start. Once you do, momentum will meet you there and multiply your effort in ways you can't even imagine from a standstill. The 5-minute rule bypasses fear and procrastination. It's a tool designed not just to help you get things done, but to disarm the mental resistance that so often holds people back. Fear and procrastination are sneaky. They don't usually shout. They whisper. They show up in thoughts like I'm too tired, I'll do it tomorrow, or I don't know where to begin. These thoughts feel harmless, but they create patterns of delay, avoidance, and ultimately regret. The 5-minute rule cuts through all of that. The brilliance of this rule lies in its simplicity. When your brain sees a big task, it triggers fear. Not always the dramatic kind of fear, but the subtle kind. The fear of failure, of discomfort, of not doing it perfectly. That fear leads to procrastination. You start negotiating with time. I'll do it after lunch. I'll start once I clean my space. I need to get in the right headspace. Hours go by, days, sometimes weeks, and that task is still sitting there, stealing your energy even when you're not working on it. The 5-minute rule breaks the cycle by shrinking the task down to a time frame your brain doesn't feel threatened by. You're not committing to finish. You're not promising to be perfect. You're simply saying, I'll give this 5 minutes. That's small enough to silence fear. It's short enough to feel doable. Your brain doesn't kick up resistance because there's no real risk in trying something for 5 minutes. And once you begin, you change the state of your body and mind. You're no longer frozen. You're no longer thinking about the task you're in it. That matters because fear and procrastination thrive in delay. They get their power from inaction. But once you start, you rob them of that power. The 5-minute rule doesn't just bypass fear. It exposes how irrational it is. You realize the task wasn't as scary or difficult as your brain made it out to be. This isn't about tricking yourself into productivity. It's about taking back control. When you use the 5-minute rule, you stop waiting for your feelings to align with your goals. You stop being led by moods and start being led by principles. The principle here is movement, not speed, not completion, just movement, because fear feeds on stillness, but action starves it. There's also a neurological benefit. Every time you start a task you've been avoiding, your brain rewards you. Dopamine, the chemical associated with motivation and pleasure, is released when you begin making progress. That progress, even if it's just 5 minutes worth, creates a positive feedback loop. You feel good for starting, which makes it easier to keep going. And the more often you do this, the more you train your brain to associate action with relief instead of stress. The 5 5-minute rule also neutralizes perfectionism, which is one of procrastination's best friends. Perfectionism says, don't start unless you can do it perfectly. But 5 minutes doesn't require perfection. It just requires presence. You don't need the perfect words, the perfect plan, or the perfect setup. You just need to show up for 5 minutes. That tiny shift in expectation lowers the internal pressure and makes starting possible. People spend years stuck in cycles of inaction, not because they lack talent, time, or opportunity, but because they've never learned how to overcome fear and procrastination in real time. The 5-minute rule is a weapon against that paralysis. It puts you in motion when everything else says stop. And in motion, everything changes. Your mood, your mindset, your momentum. This rule gives you a way out, a way forward. It gives you a tool that works on bad days, busy days, distracted days. Because you don't need to conquer the whole mountain. You just need to take one small, decisive step. And once that step is taken, fear loses its grip. Procrastination loses its voice, and you begin to regain control of your time and your mind. Consistent, small actions lead to big results. That's a principle that quietly powers success in every area of life, from business and health to relationships and creativity. Most people are waiting for a breakthrough, a giant leap, a flash of brilliance, a surge of motivation that catapults them into achievement. But the truth is, real results are rarely the outcome of single, dramatic actions. They're the result of small, consistent steps taken over time. That's where transformation lies, in the daily, often invisible decisions that compound. One of the biggest misconceptions about productivity is that you need to make massive moves to create meaningful progress. That belief leads to a stop-start cycle. People go all in for a few days, then burn out, get discouraged, and quit. But consistent small actions avoid that trap. They're sustainable, they're repeatable. And because they're small, they're much easier to turn into habits. It's like planting seeds. A seed by itself doesn't look impressive. It doesn't demand attention, but give it consistency, sunlight, water, care, and eventually that seed becomes something alive. It grows. The same thing happens when you take small actions consistently, whether it's writing 200 words a day, saving a few dollars at a time, reaching out to one person daily, or spending 10 focused minutes on a skill. Those small actions add up. And once they add up, they build momentum, confidence, and results that look far bigger than the effort that created them. The power in small actions is that they are frictionless. You don't need to psych yourself up. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't even need to feel like it. You just need to follow through. And the more you follow through, the more your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who procrastinates or gives up. You start seeing yourself as someone who shows up. That shift isn't minor, it's foundational. Identity drives behavior, and behavior compounds into outcomes. Another key element here is patience. Small actions are deceptively powerful because their effects are delayed. You don't see the impact immediately, which is why so many people quit too soon. They don't realize that results are always on a delay, but consistency bridges the gap between effort and reward. Every time you take that small step, you're building a foundation. You're stacking invisible wins that will eventually become visible breakthroughs. This principle also removes the excuse of time. People say, I don't have an hour, or I don't have a free weekend, but you don't need an hour. You need 5 minutes. You need one step. And when you do that repeatedly, the accumulation is inevitable. 10 minutes a day becomes 60 hours a year. One action a day becomes 365 a year. And most people would be amazed at how different their life could look after a year of consistent, small action. Consistency also increases skill. You don't get better by waiting for inspiration or binge, working once a month. You get better by showing up every day, even for a short time. That repetition builds not just habits, but mastery. It allows for growth, refinement, and confidence. And over time, the gap between where you are and where you want to be starts to shrink. Not because you leaped it, but because you walked it, step by step. There's no magic in doing something once. The magic is in doing it again and again until it becomes part of who you are. That's where real productivity comes from. Not bursts of activity, but a rhythm of small, intentional choices. That rhythm creates a lifestyle, and that lifestyle produces the kind of results most people only dream about. Discipline creates success, not motivation. In today's world, we often hear the phrase, "find your motivation," or "wait for inspiration." It suggests that success is fueled by the powerful emotional surge of wanting something badly enough. However, the truth is that motivation is unreliable. It's a feeling, not a system, and feelings fluctuate. You won't always feel motivated, especially when the task ahead seems daunting, repetitive, or less than exciting. That's why discipline is the real key to productivity and long-term success. Discipline doesn't require motivation. It works in spite of it. Discipline is about showing up when you don't feel like it, following through when the excitement fades, and doing what needs to be done even if you're not in the mood. Motivation can inspire you to start, but it won't carry you through when the initial excitement wears off. That's where discipline takes over. The best part about discipline is that it doesn't require perfection. It's not about doing everything perfectly every time. It's about being consistent. Even when the results aren't immediate, even when the process feels slow, discipline keeps you moving forward. It's the habit of showing up, regardless of circumstances or emotions. It's about sticking with the process day in and day out, even when the end goal feels distant or elusive. One of the key components of discipline is structure. Discipline thrives when you create systems that eliminate the need for motivation altogether. If you rely on willpower alone, you'll eventually burn out or give in to distractions. But when you build habits and routines into your daily life, you make success inevitable. For example, setting specific times to work, creating a designated space for focus, or breaking tasks into smaller, more manageable steps all support your discipline. These systems provide external structure that reinforces internal discipline, helping you stay on track even when your mood or energy levels fluctuate. Discipline also means being willing to do what others aren't. It's easy to make excuses, to let distractions creep in, to choose comfort over effort. But success belongs to those who choose discipline over ease. The more you rely on discipline, the stronger your ability to overcome resistance becomes. You get better at doing the hard things, the things that are necessary but not always pleasant, and you begin to expect success because you've created a system of self-accountability. It's important to recognize that discipline is a muscle. Like any muscle, it grows stronger with consistent use. When you exercise discipline daily, whether that's through work, learning, or personal development, you reinforce the mindset that you're someone who follows through. Over time, this mindset builds a momentum of its own. Discipline leads to improved results, which leads to greater confidence, and that confidence fuels even more discipline. It's a virtuous cycle that becomes self-reinforcing. The beauty of discipline is that it doesn't require constant energy or emotional highs. It's about creating small, consistent habits that lead to progress. When you approach your goals with discipline, you don't need to rely on fluctuating motivation. You simply need to trust in the process and keep going, one step at a time. Whether you're working on a long-term project, trying to improve your health, or learning a new skill, discipline will carry you through the difficult moments when motivation fades. It's in these moments that discipline separates those who succeed from those who stop trying. In the end, motivation is a bonus. It's great when it shows up, but it's not something you can count on. Discipline, however, is something you can cultivate, control, and rely on every day. It's the steady force behind success, the quiet, consistent drive that leads to lasting results. By focusing on discipline, you turn success into a habit, not a fleeting burst of excitement. And that habit, built over time, is what creates the results you want in every area of your life. The truth is, productivity doesn't rely on waiting for the perfect moment or the surge of motivation. It's about making consistent, intentional choices every single day. The 5-minute rule, the power of small actions, momentum, and the discipline to keep showing up even when motivation fades. These are the real secrets to long-term success. It's not about dramatic leaps. It's about small, steady steps that, over time, compound into extraordinary results. Success isn't reserved for those who feel inspired or are blessed with bursts of energy. It's for those who commit to showing up, even when it's hard, even when the results aren't immediate, and even when motivation is nowhere to be found. The greatest productivity isn't found in the moments of grand inspiration. It's found in the quiet moments of consistency, discipline, and persistence. So stop waiting for the perfect time or the right mood. Start now, take action, commit to discipline, and watch how small steps lead to massive transformation.